A slightly different show this week. We're into our holidays here in the UK, and so usually at this time of year I schedule a special and then take a week off to spend time with family doing what we should all do a couple of times in the year at least. Take some time to rest, recharge, and just be. Not that that'll mean I won't be taking and making pictures. My X100V, my travelling companion, is never that far away. What's the matter? Right, okay. Not so early on into the show, perhaps. All right, let's do you a breakfast on the hoof, as it were. All right, there we go. A snack. Can I have one? Do you want one? No, not really. So, to this special then. This is a story of two gents of the photographic world, which I know may seem a dated phrase. But remembering that the essence of that word is not necessarily about gender, but gentleness. That's why I thought it might make a charming holiday edition. Now, a couple of Mondays ago, I mentioned my late friend Steve Shipman, the photographer, one of the real gentlefolk of photography, without a doubt. He passed away in 2018, and I'm not quite sure I'm ready to believe that was actually 7 years ago. That's closer to a decade than I feel comfortable with. And I'll not forget being told of that day. Our friend, Steve's very good friend, Phil Payne, called us up. I was at Greenham Common, actually, with the family. We were having a picnic. It was lunchtime on a Saturday. And we'd not long sat down, and the phone rang. It was Phil. And he gave me the news of Steve's passing. And I couldn't really take it in that day. I often talk about photographers who've achieved the most in their art or craft as being the most generous. And I know it doesn't always work that way, but I think as a generalisation, it does prove me right time and again. Steve was certainly one of those. His work is kept in UK museum archives, such as the National Portrait Gallery. But I never heard him shout about it, really. He was quietly confident. Not smug, quietly confident. He was that one in the corner who I'd seen a lot and learned a lot about, but he didn't lead in with conversations of what he'd done, who he'd met, who he'd photographed. It was a really special lesson, actually. I'm still working on that one, Steve, as I look upwards. I think there was a mix of joy and absolute terror when he chose to attend a workshop little old me was doing on sound, easily a decade ago plus. And then from memory, he plonked himself into one of the front row seats in this tiny theatre that I'd hired. And when his diagnosis came for an incurable cancer, I think we were all shocked, because out of all of us, he seemed to be the fittest. So we decided to make a film together, a legacy piece, really, for his wife and his two daughters. Quietly spoken, gently natured, he recorded the interview you're about to hear with me today, just a year or so before he passed. And I'm going to play you that audio version of the interview today. Now, it was recorded for in-vision purposes. Hang on, here comes a bike. That's apt, because that was what Steve liked doing the most. Sit down. Wait for the bike. Morning.
Morning.
Sit. Good boy. All right, you've earned one of these now. Hold on, Steve. Yes, it was recorded for in-vision purposes, and I will link to a shorter version of this on YouTube. I've got, I think, one on Vimeo as well. And at times he's talking about pictures, which, whilst visual, I think is a spoken piece too. There are many learnings, as they say, on motivational movies. I think his passion, his tone, his descriptions, they all work as well in this sound medium as they did that day that we recorded it for video purposes. And that's why I went back in last week and re-edited it for sound for this episode, for this special. I think it's an important chat because a lot of what he says is so pertinent to the love of photography being more important than the likes and the digital validation. And within it, he talks about a family project that he made too, which I think, given the situation, became many more times valuable for all involved. So that's Steve. And then Charlie Waite is my second guest today in this special, an interview I recorded when we'd emerged out of all our lockdowns, but we were still, I think, as a nation here at any rate, hiding under our duvets to a degree, with travel and jab still going hand in hand if you wanted to explore further than your front door and your house. Oh, look at the geese. Tell me you're not all flying south yet. Blimey, it's a formation. Look at that. Never mind the red arrows. Perfect. Charlie, this is regarded as one of Britain's leading landscape photographers, with a career spanning decades and a portfolio that feels less like a collection of images and more like meditation. I think it's a word I may have used in the interview. I'm quite proud of that because it is. I really, truly believe that. Charlie Waite has a beautiful heart and generosity. And I love the meditative feel about Charlie's work. How you can feel enveloped by the landscape that he's standing in just by looking at one of his pictures, and you truly can. I am not a landscape photographer. I like being in landscape and I like taking pictures of landscapes, but I'm not, there's always time yet, somebody who can honestly lay claim to being a practitioner of what really is an art. His early life in theatre perhaps explains why he loves the drama of the landscape. And I think it would be fair to say he's inspired countless photographers, not only through his award-winning work, but also through his role as founder of Light and Land. So yes, the second interview, a second part of the show in many respects, that was recorded in the shadow of COVID. As the week I was due to go and record it in person, because that had been the plan. We were going to go out, walk a bit and take some photos. But sickness in the office prevented me from doing so. So Steve and Charlie, two photographers with a gentle nature and gentle spirit. Today's holiday special.
Today on the Photo Walk.
Being a photographer is a great enabler.
I'm looking at centipedes now and slugs. I'm just thinking, you're amazing. You're an amazing living being, and your life is as important to yourself as mine is to mine.
And I said, I'm really sorry. He said, you're looking, but you're not seeing.
So all I can do is stand there and gasp. Because I think when we do suddenly pause for a moment, and what do we mean by contemplative and meditative? When we actually pause and think, we are part of this absolutely extraordinary thing called human existence.
It's been a great privilege to be a photographer, and I don't regret a single second of my career.
Charlie Waite and Steve Shipman are my guests on the Photo Walk show today, a holiday special. The mailbag returns in the next episode after our week's break. I think we're going to need a mailbag special at this rate. I've been saying that, of course, for a month or so now. So get your ducks in order, Neil, or however the phrase goes. Before we start, a thank you to those who support this show. First up, my wonderful extra milers, our patrons on Patreon. Each week there's an extra show available through Patreon, which this week features a conversation with one of our talented extra milers, actually, Bob Soltis from the States. Plus, on the Extra Mile channel, there is a new feature every day, Monday through Friday, called Reflections, my own take on making pictures and a life behind the lens. Just short features. Thank you also to my sponsor, arthelper.ai, who help you sell your photos online by making the posts and the mock-ups and sorting out those marketing emails for you. That's stuff that often you think, oh, I don't know where to start with this. So if you thought I'd like to sell my work, but you don't have that clue on how to start, arthelper.ai, they'll do the tricky bits for you. And you can get 30 days free with code PHOTOWALK when you go to arthelper.ai. So, shall we walk? Let's make this a gentle amble today to suit the feeling, I think. The mood song, as it's called. Checklist out, though. Coffee, check. Garibaldi's, check. Walking boots, check. Got some spare film? Extra SD card? Check. And what would a gentle final thing on the list be to fit the tone?
Oh, I don't know, Neil. A picnic blanket to lie somewhere quiet under the rustling leaves of an old oak staring out into a beautiful landscape scene, not a person in sight while we listen along together? Well, that's the longest item I've had suggested on the checklist, but I think it's good. Check. Let's walk then.
I was thinking as I edited this piece, and we're starting with Steve, in 2018 when I recorded this, the idea of podcasting was not on the agenda, really. I wasn't even listening to them in any great number. And my interviewing was firmly from behind the camera, a kind of voices off approach, as you will hear at times during this today. So this is an edited interview where Steve tells the story, really minus the questions. But it will make sense, I think. And I suppose the sense I'm hoping you'll discover is that he's telling his story from a stage. Although knowing Steve, he'd have said something like, please don't make that stage too large. I don't want any fuss, you know. That's what he'd have said. The other thing that occurs to me is at the stage I usually ask the question, the last question of the show, the why question, that wasn't asked. Or maybe it was, because I think he certainly addresses it. And I do wonder, and it may be romantic notion, I don't know, but in some way, whether Steve was responsible for the why question years later on. Anyway, here's my conversation with Steve Shipman, and I'll pop up to bridge between Steve and Charlie in a while. Do you remember your first camera?
Yes, I do. It was a Canon FTB. And it came about because I had a job on a building site for my first sort of summer holiday as a 16-year-old. And I earned a fortune. I earned enough money to buy a really good camera and a really good hi-fi system. What was a fortune? About £350. And with about half of that I bought the camera, and the other half I managed to buy a turntable, an amp and a pair of speakers. I love my music, and I wanted, it was gadgets. I've always loved gadgets. I suppose that's part of being a photographer. We like the sort of technology. And actually, to be honest, I used the hi-fi system far more once I bought it than I did the camera. The camera stayed on the shelf for months afterwards before I sort of thought, maybe I should have a go with it, otherwise it is wasted money. I wasn't really heading in any direction, really. I know my dad would have liked me to have had a proper job with a salary. But I was artistic, I liked drawing, I liked designing things, I drew cars endlessly. But I tried out the camera, and we had a pet dog, and of course I photographed the dog, and then I photographed flowers in the garden, and then we went for a walk and I photographed ducks by the lake. I've still got the pictures, actually, I can show you them if you want. And it was a revelation, it really was, because particularly the shot of our golden retriever, the clarity of the lens, the inadvertent shallow depth of field, because I had no idea what I was doing, really brought the picture to life, and I was transfixed at that moment with that picture. And that's how it started. I then shot lots and lots of pictures. I was inspired by the making of pictures, and I took pictures of my dad chopping trees down in the garden. I took pictures of my brother playing rugby. I got involved with the school magazine and started to supply them with photos. I photographed all my friends, all my girlfriends, and it just grew and grew. It was an obsession, and I was lucky enough to have an enlightened art master in a otherwise very academic school who I could ask about photography. And I showed him a Vogue magazine, actually, and I said, do people earn money doing this? Is it possible to earn a living taking photos? And he said yes. He had a nephew who was a commercial photographer, and he said absolutely it is. And my path was set. That's how it came about. So I then went on to do a degree in photography, and on from there.
And never looked back.
Never looked back. I was influenced by lots of photographers, and it was while I was at college that I came across their work in the college library. I was at the LCP, the London College of Printing as it was then called, and they had a fantastic library of some now very rare photography books that I can remember. People like James Wedge, who did a limited edition book, and there was a copy of it in that library. So I remember being influenced by people like Gordon Parks, all sorts of extraordinary people who sort of added to the sum total of what I liked doing. But I wasn't drawn to fashion, I wasn't drawn to architecture, I wasn't drawn to news. I just liked taking photos of all sorts. I suppose I was inspired. I never felt drawn to sort of copy people's work, I did feel inspired to produce work myself that was of that kind of standard, I suppose. So I was excited by it. It thrilled me. I remember thinking, you know, is this a lifestyle? You know, having found that you could earn a living doing it, could I earn a living doing it? Was I going to get my Porsche and my pool by the time I was 40?
Did you?
No. But I was lucky enough to get a job as an assistant when I left college. It was an extraordinary set of events. Graham Hughes was the man I assisted full-time for 2 years. And I was still at college when his assistant phoned the college to say he was leaving. Graham Hughes was looking for someone else. The call, oddly, came through to the darkroom in the college where I happened to be working. An old friend of mine, Ollie, picked up the phone and said, "Someone from Graham Hughes' studio? You like Graham Hughes, don't you?" And handed me the phone. And I took this call from Graham Hughes' assistant, who then became a friend, John. He said, you know, "I'm leaving the job, would you be interested in assisting?" Because Graham Hughes used to go to the LCP and he wanted to follow on with another. And honestly, I could not believe my luck. Yes, 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 please. When do you want me there? How high do I jump, you know? And I was coming up to the end of my final term. I really did badly in my end of year exams, but hey. And I stepped straight into this job as an assistant, which on the one hand was idyllic. I learned an awful lot from a man I'd already admired. I used to keep a scrapbook of tear sheets, and his were amongst them. But he was a hard taskmaster, and I did have the odd camera thrown at me. I was sworn at continuously, and everything was my fault. But I stuck it for 2 years, and I came out pretty well set up to be a photographer, a professional photographer. Most of the London photographers that I knew about, the commercial photographers, had assistants. Most of them had studios, full-time assistants. Some of them had a PA working with them. They all had agents, and they were big names. And I was lucky enough to work for one of them. Nowadays, I'm not sure if people have those overheads anymore. And I'm sure that whereas a photographer would have had a full-time assistant then, they may use many freelancers now, according to the job, the size of the job, people's availability, budgets, and that kind of thing. I would imagine that fewer photographers have their own studios these days. And I'm guessing, but I think they probably work from home or work from rented office space, and you know, pick and choose the right people for the right job on an ad hoc basis. I mean, the camera was thrown at me because I jammed it. It was a Hasselblad. And although I'd used Hasselblads a little bit at college, they were very high-end cameras. And we used other cameras like Mamiya's or Bronicas, which were a bit cheaper. But I didn't realise that when you take the lens off a Hasselblad body, you have to wind on the shutter first. Otherwise, the camera shutter and the camera lens are not kind of synced. And so I pressed the button to release it, and it just got stuck. And he phoned a friend of his who was a bit of a techie. The friend came round with a long screwdriver and a solemn face, managed to sort of undo it all. But that was how the camera would have came to be thrown at me across the room. I caught it.
You never made the mistake again.
Never made the mistake again, that's right. But it was good. Graham was a passionate photographer. He was very creative, very intuitive. Everything he did was off the cuff. You never knew what you were going to be shooting that day or how you were going to be shooting it. He made a lot of use of outdoor lighting. He was just a maverick, really. He gave me a fantastic grounding in all sorts of work. Portraits, still lives. I do have a story about a still life I shot for him, and I'll tell you this quickly. A friend of his had made a folding room screen, a 3-part room screen that you'd put up to change behind, for example. Very beautiful thing, made of Japanese silk. He'd asked Graham to photograph it. Graham said, "You do it," you know. So I set it up on a nice backdrop, lit it nicely, so you can see all the shapes and the colours of the screen. And Graham said, "Hold it right there. We're going to hang a light bulb in front of it, a bare light bulb." So he did that, and he looped the light wire so that there was a circle in it. Just a little artistic touch, very typical of him. We shot it on 5.4. I ran the film down to the lab, waited for it to be processed, and ran it back to him thinking, that looks great. Put it on the light box. And he said, "Where's the loop in the wire?" And I looked at it again, and the wire had swung round. So the loop was straight onto the camera, and I hadn't noticed. And I said, "I'm really sorry." He said, "You're looking, but you're not seeing." And that was a lesson. He'd use artificial light in all sorts of strange situations. He had a thing called a Norman, which was an old portable battery light. If he couldn't plug in his Balcars, he'd use the Norman. And I remember a shot he did, which I wasn't involved with, but he photographed a girl wearing a fur coat in a cable car as it crossed the valley. And somehow he managed to sync the light in those old pre-radio days to flash inside the cable car and illuminate her against the sort of glowering skies. It was a magnificent picture. Before the days of radio syncing, and I've no idea to this day how he did it. It must have been done manually. Somebody must have said 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, bang, and got the shot. But it was terrific and typical of him. Everything was shot on film. We proofed it by looking at Polaroids. I permanently had Polaroids under my arms, waiting for them to develop. They never developed quick enough, It was always, I can't remember now, a minute and a half. And, we used to wear out our T-shirts because some of the acid developer would leak through and we'd have holes under our T-shirts. I had a T-shirt which he bought me called Ever Ready. So Polaroids were our proofing system, and even then you had to learn to interpret the Polaroid according to the kind of film you were then going to be using. So there was a lot of craft involved. You used a light meter, you used Polaroids, you spend a lot of time setting up your shots and getting it as accurate as you could before you committed it to film. Because once you committed it to film, that was the end result. There was very little retouching done in those days. I think there was a natural time. I think Graham and I got tired of each other. At that time, I was the longest serving assistant with him. Most of his other assistants, only did a few months or a year maybe. So I'd had a very good run. I was ready to go out on my own. I was a bit sort of, I had itchy feet. I wanted to sort of have a go. And there was some niggly things going on in the studio. I can't now remember what they were, but I felt a bit sort of like I was the scapegoat, and I thought, no, this is the time. But it did coincide very usefully with Amanda, my wife, getting a job for a TV company, which doubled her salary, which meant that we could afford the rent and I could have a go at being a photographer in my own right. I met Amanda at a Saturday night church hall disco, as they used to be called. I'd just finished my Saturday job, actually. My mum and dad suggested that I might like to study a bit more for my O-levels. And so I stopped the job and went out that night with a mate from the shop I'd worked in to see what we could do. And I saw this girl dancing on the dance floor, and she looked lovely. She was just absorbed in her own, movements and just having a lovely time. And I thought, she looks nice. In my sort of little 16-year-old mind, nearly 16-year-old, I was 15 still. So I did pluck up the courage to go and say, "You're a great dancer, would you like a drink?" And she said, "No thanks, I've just had one," which would have flattened any less keen young man. But I said, "Well, I'm having a drink, come and be with me anyway." And she did, bless her. And anyway, we got to know each other, and bar 1 year gap while we were at uni, we've been together ever since. She's a very strong, wise woman. We talk a lot. We walk and talk a lot. It's something we've always done, with or without a dog. We've walked and talked. And that's the strength, I think, of our relationship. We just talk through everything. We always have done. She's a very wise, understanding, considerate and patient person. She's kept us together as a family. She's the glue that does hold us together. She's an absolute pillar of strength for the girls. And she's the rock for me. We were very fortunate. We had a good sort of 10 years or so at our careers. I was establishing myself as a photographer. She worked for a TV company at the time. And then we decided to start our family. And of course, at that time, I thought, I'm going to buy a studio as well and move house. So all within a few months, Amanda gave birth to Eleanor, our oldest daughter. I bought the studio and we moved house. And there was followed by a few traumatic years, I have to say. Maddie arrived 3 years later, and we did have, it was a lot of fun. They were fantastic daughters, and we enjoyed every second with them. But I was a freelance photographer. I hated turning down work, so I did miss a lot of family occasions, which to this day I regret. But we had a brilliant time. The girls have been fabulous. Without a moment of, of change. They've been absolutely brilliant. We're very fortunate in that the girls get on extremely well. They are each other's best friends. There's 3 years between them, but you wouldn't think it. Eleanor is very artistic. She's very ambitious, very focused on what she wants. She's very fussy and very particular. I know she won't mind me saying. Maddie is very gregarious and outgoing. She loves a party. She's got hundreds of friends. And somehow that mix of Eleanor's sort of intellectual intensity meshes with Maddie's ebullience, and they get on very, very well indeed. And we are very blessed with that. We all get on as a family. Manda is a great communicator, and the girls know that at any time of the day or night they can call us. I mean, I do speak to them myself, but Manda's the one that they turn to if they need, a shoulder to cry on. Eleanor is a community-based artist. She lives in Bristol, and at the moment she's working part-time for Bristol Council. So her job means that she goes out into the community. She creates artistic activities that bring members of those communities together. So there might be people in high-rise blocks that don't know each other. So Eleanor's task might be to create some sort of event that they're all going to be invited to, and they will meet each other perhaps for the first time. And the events can be all sorts of things: painting, cutting up paper. It could be activities of all sorts. It's usually some creative endeavour that she will oversee. It's always great fun, and she loves doing it. She's a great people person herself, and she gets enormous satisfaction from getting people talking to each other who may not have otherwise met. Maddie would love to be in theatre. Her great passion is musical theatre, and we've shared many great moments at musicals with her over the past years, both watching them with her and watching her in them. She's performed in some fantastic things, one of which, a particular highlight, was Les Mis, as we call it, Les Miserables, which was performed by her school. And she had one of the leading roles, and honestly there was not a dry eye in the house at the end of it. It was fantastic and way exceeded any professional production that we've ever seen. It was so moving. So she's a great performer. She's a very passionate girl. She wears her heart on her sleeve, and at the moment she's working in a talent agency, so she gets to meet a lot of actors, she gets to see a lot of plays and productions, and better than that, she gets to go backstage and meet the stars.
I imagine you're immeasurably proud of it.
I am immeasurably proud of them all. I mean, we always have our doubts about anyone who follows Amanda in my footsteps. We're both freelance, we're both artistic, and we both have precarious careers. And the girls, despite having said we will never be freelance, seem to be following us in our freelance footsteps. But they're committed to what they do, they're very passionate about what they do, and I think they'll be successful. I like symmetry in a photo. I like clean lines. I love things that are just balanced. So there's an element in the frame which corresponds with something else in the frame that makes it even. So I like simplicity. In my portraits, I've always gone for strong headshots. I believe that expressions convey huge amounts of meaning. And in my wedding work, I try to keep shots uncluttered where possible. So there's a clear background, or we use depth of field to blur the background so the subject stands out. In my personal work, which I shoot a bit of these days, sort of street photography, I look for shapes and lines. And again, I'm looking for balance and symmetry, light and dark. And I suppose that's more of the signature for my kind of thing. A lot of photographers I know love busy, cluttered pictures, and I do like looking at them, but I don't tend to take them myself. But no, I love I like the simplicity of great photography. I want it to be clear and strong and emotive with any luck. Sometimes it's the positioning of the subject that, well, obviously it will affect the photo. Margaret Thatcher gave me her situation. She said, we're going to shoot it here, and so I had to shoot it right there. So not my ideal scenario. But again, it's a simple situation. There's a wall with some, balustrade behind her or something. It's fairly soft and nondescript, so she stands out from the background nicely. So I was happy with that. And a lot of my celebrity headshots are quite simple. They're on plain backgrounds, fairly sort of, nondescript. I do admit to being influenced by Irving Penn and Snowden particularly, who I met on one occasion. And I like that kind of thing where the subject is lighter than the background. The skin tones are lighter than the background, so they stand out nice and clearly. Occasionally there were moments where we had agents and minders and assistants sort of looking at their watches and saying, you've got 5 more minutes, 30 seconds. I remember doing Claudia Schiffer, dream job in those days. She was a big named model. She just put out a DVD, a Keep Fit DVD, and we were photographing her in a hotel, as one does, and she would not take the DVD down from beside her face. There was no way I was going to get my clean headshot of her, beautiful as she is. She held it there, or she held it there, or it was there. It might have been like that. She would not budge, and that was such a shame. But a lot of the time, my subjects were more than willing to stand in front of me and just be themselves, and that is the most important thing. I did a picture of Dustin Hoffman, which was very early on in my series of black and white portraits as it became. And he said, well, what do you want me to do? And I said, just look at me. And he just looked at me, and I got the most brilliant, revealing, real portrait of him, which to this day I'm very proud of. He was such a lovely man. The job was commissioned by You magazine, which is the colour supplement of the Mail on Sunday, and I did a lot of work for them when I was working in editorial. And at that time there was a young artist called Stephen Wiltshire who was autistic, and he's still around now, and his great skill was drawing things from memory. Now, Dustin Hoffman had just done Rain Man, and he was playing a sort of savant, is that the right word, in the film. And the magazine had the idea of introducing Dustin Hoffman to Stephen Wiltshire to see what happened. And that was it, and I had to just photograph the results. And I remember photographing them both on a blue background. I was in that mood that day, so a blue background was set up. And it was in some rehearsal studios in the west of London, so a very nondescript place. Dustin Hoffman had about 12 people around him all the time, and Stephen Wiltshire had his people. So we did the shoot, everybody left the room, and just as Dustin Hoffman walked past me, I said, is there a chance I could do a picture of you on your own? And he said, I'll see what I can do. And he left. So myself and my assistant waited and waited. We waited 2 hours, and at the point where I thought we were going to pack up, Dustin Hoffman came back into the room on his own and said, what do you want me to do? And he stood there, and I directed him and just said, just look at me. And he gave me that picture. And that was the beginning of that series of portraits. It was so inspiring and powerful and exciting to have that captured moment just for me. It wasn't for the magazine, it was just for me. And that led to that whole series developing. And they came about because shooting for a magazine, they'd always want colour. The whole idea of a colour supplement, everything was in colour. So shooting with a Hasselblad camera, as I did, it's a modular camera where you can change a roll of film in a film back from black and white to colour. Unlike a 35mm camera where you've got a whole roll to get through and you've got to kind of finish the roll or waste it. Having shot 12 frames on a colour roll, you could then switch to black and white. So at the end of every session, without telling my subject, I'd nod to my assistant, the black and white nod, and I would be handed a roll of black and white. And I'd usually shoot on a longer lens, which meant I was framing the shot a lot tighter, and that was the shot I would get, and those would be mine. Yes, the lens was the equivalent of an 85mm, I guess. So a nice portrait lens, very flattering lens actually, very, very sharp. The maximum aperture was f4 if I remember correctly, so not a hugely wide lens, but the background still dropped nicely out of focus. And then my friend Tony Waite would print them up for me. In fact, I liked his printing so much, I would give him the neg and just say, print it as you wish, and it would always be an absolute stunner. Do I miss darkroom days? I never liked printing myself, ever. But I recognised the skill of a good black and white printer. They were absolute magicians in the darkroom, so yes, I was always pleased to have a black and white print. It was a possession, really. It was something like, I can keep this bit of that person. You feel excited, very upbeat, you feel like you've achieved something, you've captured something that maybe nobody else could get. It's a fantastic feeling when you come away from a shoot knowing it's gone well and you've got something that you're going to be proud of. And of course the opposite is always true too. If the shoot hasn't gone well, you come away thinking, oh my God, why didn't I do this? What did I say that for? But luckily they're not too often. In the early days, I used to shoot black and white film portraits for a magazine called Campaign, which was a Haymarket production. They used to shoot advertising art directors and copywriters. And they always wanted a very particular type of shot. It was this sort of pseudo-creative thing where people stood on fire escapes, and I just never got the hang of it, ever. And we'd shoot a job on a, Thursday afternoon. The art director would say, I want 10 10x8s on my desk by the next morning. So I processed the film, processed the film myself, printed it up in my own darkroom overnight, and had it in the next day. And that was the moment where I knew nah, he's not going to like these. And that was when I thought, is this for me? But I did persevere, and eventually I got onto the Sunday magazines, and they seemed to appreciate what I did. Well, I approached them actually, only because I knew that other photographers, other contemporaries of mine had pictures accepted by the gallery, and I thought, I've got portraits, some of them are of English people, let's go to the National Portrait Gallery and see what they say. And they did. They welcomed me very, very generously actually, as they did all their photographers. They had great respect for photographers. And I took along a selection of all sorts of black and white pictures, my own black and white pictures, that I'd accumulated over the years I'd been doing this series of things for myself. And Terence Pepper was the art director then, and he said, we can only accept pictures of English nationals, people who live and work in this country, even though I'd photographed, Dustin Hoffman, for example, someone who lives abroad, so they wouldn't accept his picture even though they liked it. So they made a selection and bought them from me there and then. 7 portraits, which remain in their collection to this day. Yes, I'm hugely proud of that.
Sunday Times, Cosmo, Marie
Yep.
Claire.
Yes.
Top Gear even.
Yes. I was very lucky to be in the right place at the right time. I was one of about a dozen photographers that all those magazines used all the time. And the art director of the Radio Times actually said to me once, whenever you're not shooting, ring me and we'll give you a job. I was lucky to be that busy for about 15 years. And it was a fabulous time for me. We were very fortunate. This was before I had the children. So Amanda and I really did very well in those early days. In fact, it enabled me to buy the studio ultimately. Once I'd got the studio, my career began to move away from editorial, partly because I was getting older. The art directors on the magazines I was working for got younger. They always stayed at around 24, and I was heading towards 29, 30 at that time. So I was looking for a new direction to go in, and the direction was corporate photography. And that felt right for me at that time. I was the right age to work with art directors in design agencies and advertising agencies. And so I started to shoot corporate photography, which became a real treadmill actually. Very much like the magazines, they said, right, whenever you're not working, we'll have something. It was a little bit seasonal. It tended to be busy between January and April. Everything came up to the end of the financial year when they wanted to produce their report and accounts. The photography wasn't always creative. Despite my best efforts, some art directors just wanted headshots on a white background. Coming up to the year 2000, I was thinking about the millennium and special projects and things that were significant at that time. And I was literally sitting in the bath when I had the idea to do a series of portraits of my extended family. So that would be mine and Amanda's grandparents, our parents, our brothers and sisters, and all of our cousins. And I decided that it might be fun to have everybody holding something that meant something to them, a significant object. So we ended up shooting individual portraits of 50 or so people, each holding something, and then we wrote a few words about it to sort of complete the portrait. So here's Amanda's grandpa with his book about fairies, and I'll just read the words that he said. I'm holding a book about the fairy people who have always fascinated me. I probably get this from my mother, who also had this sort of mind and whose bedtime stories to me as a child came really alive. This fairy lore takes us back to the ancient realities of life, which we all so much miss in the hard world of today. So having read the words and put those together with a picture, I think we have a lovely portrait of this man. He loved ancient history, he loved standing stones, he loved the idea of the Knights Templars. He was a real romantic and a great historian. His passion was history, but he also had this slightly alternative view that perhaps something that was improbable could be possible. This is my dad, whose big passion is films. He has an encyclopedic memory for films, film directors and actors. So this object for him was the Halliwell's Film Guide. And he talks in his bit of copy about going to Saturday morning cinema shows and watching the B-reels and visiting cinemas sometimes twice a week. So it's a great bit of personal family history, all wrapped up in one portrait. This is my mum, Dorothy. She says in her little story, "I've had a lifelong interest in gardens and gardening. As a child, I created a small garden in the house where I was born in. I've created many gardens in my married life, from small terraces to walled gardens and gardens on hillsides with rockeries and steps. I particularly like growing flowers and gain great satisfaction from watching nature at work." In fact, she was a passionate gardener and adored her flowers and gardening, and has been a great influence on Amanda in terms of her own growth and knowledge as a gardener. We shot some in my studio using studio lighting and a canvas background which I painted myself. Others, we took the background to the location, wherever that might be. It might have been somebody's house. We even set it up outdoors a couple of times. So it was all done on what I felt at the time was a neutral background, because I felt that people would stand out against it very well. So this is my wife Amanda with her armful of homegrown vegetables. Her words are, "Here I am with an armful of homegrown vegetables, not genetically modified, no pesticides or herbicides, just fresh and delicious. I love gardening. I enjoy the creative decisions, the seasonal changes, scents, textures and colours, form and structure, the physical exertion in making it all happen, and with vegetable gardening, the delightful edible outcome." 15 years later, we decided to do the same project again, partly motivated by some of our relatives becoming quite elderly. So here we have in the second volume, done in 2015, my daughter Eleanor, proudly holding her notebooks that she has collected and filled over the years of being an art student and subsequently working as a professional artist. Slightly different format with these pictures. I shot them on a 35mm equivalent digital camera, and this is shot in her now hometown of Bristol. Maddie lived at the time we shot this in Brighton, which she absolutely loved. She was also a very keen runner, and she'd just completed her first full marathon, having done 5 half marathons by way of training and building up. So this is what she says. "After much debate about what to hold as my thing for this project, I came to the conclusion that I have no current thing, I'm just doing my thing." And in many ways that does sum up Maddie so much. She very much and heartily does her thing. I've enjoyed shooting this project for a number of reasons. Primarily, I suppose, it's a body of work that has a finite sort of beginning, middle and end. But equally importantly, I loved visiting every member of our family. It's been a lovely way to reconnect with some relatives that we perhaps only see once every year or two, and for them to be part of a project which kind of encompasses them all. They all feel very much part of it. Now, Amanda's mum, who's here, she wasn't very well at the time we shot this. So to commemorate the completion of this book, we staged a big family party in a hall and invited everybody. And amazingly, everybody came. There's nearly 60 people here. And some of them brought food and drinks and wine. Some just played music, but it was just a big family gathering. And we projected the pictures and showed them all. And for some of us, it was actually a very moving occasion. Photographing those close to me, photographing the people I relate to and feel comfortable with, whether they're related or not. It has been a thoroughly enjoyable project, and yes, it brings me back full circle to starting out when I was a professional photographing my own family. Photography has changed my history completely. It has been the single most influencing thing in my life. My career has been entirely in photography. I've been a photographer shooting on film, and I've seen that change into shooting on digital. I've worked in magazines, I've worked for corporate, I've worked in weddings, pretty much in equal amounts, mostly in weddings now. I've seen a lot of change and I've enjoyed all of it. I've embraced all of it as my career has proceeded. I feel a bit like a grand old man of photography now, having seen all those changes. And who could have foreseen the change that digital would have had? You know, in those days of shooting on Ektachrome and Polaroids under your arms and, you know, holding things up to the light. It's been a magical journey and I've enjoyed every second of it. So yes, it's made me who I am without doubt. I've enjoyed it hugely, and I try and enthuse to whoever I'm working with. I've never been one to keep secrets to myself. I've always been happy to share my techniques and my ideas. I think if you share ideas, more ideas will come. In the days of shooting film, I remember crowding around light rooms at Joe's Basement or Metro, and everybody was very guarded. They'd look at the picture, you know, you can't look at my stuff. You know, how'd you get that effect? I'm not telling you. It was all terribly guarded. And I've never felt that way inclined. I've always wanted to share my ideas. And in this digital age of sharing everything, it's a gift. And I think, being able to share ideas and techniques with other photographers is something I really enjoy doing. How are we doing? This one will go in a minute. Shall I set it off? That one's next. Being a photographer is a great enabler. It has allowed me into people's lives. It's allowed me to connect with people. It's allowed me to reconnect people. And it has allowed me to be with people. People I love, people who I like being with, people who interest me, and people who just have interesting lives in their own ways. It's been a great privilege to be a photographer, and I don't regret a single second of my career. I've enjoyed every minute. I'll miss it.
And my sincere thanks to Steve Shipman for his time that day recording our interview. It's an afternoon I shall certainly never forget, and there'll be some pictures, of course, on the show page. I have some housekeeping to do ahead of our revisit to Charlie Waite. First up, 7th of September, first week of the Scottish retreat. Still can't believe that across the 2 weeks we have one itty-bitty space remaining for the first week. So if you're thinking, hang on a moment, this is fortuitous timing. I've got some time and I really want to retreat from the world. I want to go and spend some time with people who love photography, talking about photography, walking, eating together each evening and discussing what we do in the creative life. Then this is the moment I'm calling to you, because I think of the Friday Photo Walk as a safe, thought-empowering community as much as a podcast. From shared photographic ideas and projects to conversations with those making pictures to mental well-being and mindfulness. This community celebrates the stories, the moments, large or small, and the feelings of those who take time to write and teach and show and just be there for each other. Photography, as we've often said, is so much more than a swipe and a like. It's a community of similarly spirited, creative people. I do always have trouble with that word. I can spell it, but I can't say it. For whom holding a camera brings a feeling of connectedness with the world. So we make our annual pilgrimage to Scotland's Black Isle near the cultural city of Inverness to stay on a working soft fruit farm with access to its own shop selling homegrown and local produce within reach of the most beautiful historic landscapes. They truly are. I call it Senses. The Scottish Photo Walk Retreat celebrates the feeling our podcast brings to this community, an opportunity to escape the noise and spend time with like-minded photographers. We'll be building on the empowering micro workshops that we have within the week of 2024 to embrace creative retreat challenges. We'll produce a darkroom print. We'll do some creative writing through a forest bathing experience with a professional writer. We'll continue our sound workshop to help you understand how sound can be a potent part of your storytelling. And I'll be popping something gentle in that's really the result of the last month and a half now. We'll be taking time to journal and reflect, our own reflections to go with the pictures that we make. But of course, we'll also be enjoying a breakaway as we encourage and talk with and eat with and laugh with and, of course, walk with each other, as I said. Board and lodgings included, as they say. Just bring your camera and a smile. Before we return to Charlie then, a word or three about our sponsor, arthelper.ai, who may be relevant even more after you've heard Charlie in a moment, because Charlie Waite follows immediately after this. An interview recorded a few years ago is explained, which will explain our reference to that thing that starts with C and ends with D. Shh, don't say its name. Anyway, if you are thinking during that, I've got some landscape stuff that I'd like to sell online, but I don't really know at all how to go about it. Well, arthelper.ai, they can certainly be your partner.
If you've ever thought about selling your photography online but haven't a clue where to start, I think Art Helper could probably help you because it's made for people like us. Here's how it works. You upload a photo, magically and instantly professional content is made for you, such as social media posts, email newsletters, even full Substack articles, all in your own voice. It can also generate hundreds of mock-ups for every image you upload, things like your work framed, so people get a real understanding of what your photograph could look like on their wall. It helps you connect with the right buyers and even suggests pricing based on your market. And unlike most AI tools, it has an art protection guarantee, which means something very important: your images are never used for AI training. Free to try, and Art Helper is giving our listeners a special deal. Go to arthelper.ai, use the code PHOTOWALK and get 30 days free of the pro version. I'll make sure to put a link on the show page, but also now there's a video that my friend Brandon at Art Helper made to help us understand and be able to see how the thing works. So if you go to the show page, you'll see Brandon explaining and showing exactly how this could work for you and I. It's a great way to start selling your art or growing the business you already have. And thank you, arthelper.ai, for your belief in this show. A landscape image cuts across all political and national boundaries. It transcends the constraints of language and culture. You know those words because they're on the front of your website, of course. Boy, do we need to transcend at this time in our history, don't we, Charlie?
We do.
Yeah.
No, we certainly do.
How has this time been for you then? Because how have you personally been? Because I know you probably cut a lonely figure on the landscape when you're making pictures, but you do like to spend time with people, such as with Light and Land.
I do, yes. I think it's one of the things that I care deeply about is the landscape photography fraternity. Because it's a bit like if you own a dog and you meet somebody else with a dog, you know that you're going to get along with them. But you might well come across somebody who, I don't know, maybe has perhaps fairly blatantly different ideals and values to yourself. And you know that then probably it would be hard to find a middle ground. But when you meet a landscape photographer, you know that hand on heart, their aspirations, their great desires, their pleasures and joys and wonders that they experience when they're out photographing is precisely the same as yours. Yeah. You know, you're not going to find somebody wherever it is in some beautiful landscape saying, well, do you like this? No, I don't really like this. Oh, well, I do. You know, we all speak the same language. And I think landscape photographers have what I call photography is a sort of the new common language, isn't it? It's just a completely wonderful thing to do. In my view, to be honest, Neil, I think it's time now for photography to really be fully realized, not as I hate that expression, as an art form, or it's time for it to be seen as being the camera being a most wonderful conduit to bring you so close to the natural world, so deeply close. It's just completely marvelous. So if you're feeling down, pick up a camera and walk out into the world.
You've reminded me very much of a late, great photographer and a friend to me who said, photography in my life has been the great enabler. And it's helped me bring people together too. And when I look at your work across this globe, your work, Charlie, it's been exactly that, hasn't it? And continues to be so, although travel is a bit trickier these days. But this thing you do, that we do, is a great enabler, isn't it?
Yes, it really, really is. I mean, I'd use words like contemplative, meditative, aspiration. I mean, it's. I think a good way of describing it is when you come back from a trip, you might well be asked by your partner, wife, lover, or whoever it is, you know, did you have a good time? And you might well have not succeeded in an image, but I would always say, yes, I had a terrific time, because it's the pursuit and it's the engagement. Yeah. And I think all of us, as a result of COVID, probably many of us, landscape photographers included, and photographers included, I think probably we're fairly dislocated, not us, but many are, from the natural world. And I think I've got closer, even closer. I mean, I'm looking at centipedes now and slugs. I'm just thinking, you're amazing. You're an amazing living being, and your life is as important to yourself as mine is to mine. And I just think that there will come a time, we're in barbaric situation now. We're still killing each other to settle our differences. That's kind of, I know it's a bit primitive. So I'm sure that we're on the road to becoming a more united world. And I have to say that my most wonderful phrase, if you don't mind me saying this, Neil, is the Mahatma Gandhi phrase,
right.
Which is just too good. It's to do with animals, actually. The greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way it treats its animals.
Absolutely.
I've got that on the back of my car. And it's so true. And I think the camera and using it as that conduit to bind us more closely to the landscape. Wow, it's just, one can get quite tearful about it.
I think that phrase was also used as you can judge a nation by how it treats its prisoners as well, wasn't it? Do you remember that? Yeah.
I don't know whether that was a Mahatma Gandhi, but yes, it's certainly true.
Yeah. I had a postcard arrive just moments before I came into the studio to talk with you, and it was a simple card from a Swiss photographer called Frank Dussault. A short personal message on the written side, but on the picture side, with one of his glorious pictures were 10 words overlaid that said, "It is okay to live a life others don't understand." And I think it's relevant, photographically, because let's talk about Lice and Land again. You spend a great amount of time teaching and mentoring others. Did you realise that was going to become as important as the time you managed to spend alone with your camera?
That's a really good question, Neil. I think being in the company of somebody who wants to explore that same territory that you have spent a lot of time in, and they kind of feel an immense draw to want to do so. I really do love that. Being in their company, but I spend a lot of time saying you have to get past the relationship between the gear stick, the brake, the accelerator and the clutch. Then you can fly, where you just don't have to think about this blessed technical thing. And I almost weep about the poor souls who have got to plow through this blessed technical side to really start motoring. And when we're all honouring it, I think landscape photography is a kind of a need to own that. And dealing with the disappointment to own that experience. And the camera's just so good for doing that. And it just gives me huge pleasure to be in their company. But our words are tumbling over themselves when we're all together, in the evening, in the evening meal. Wasn't that incredible, the way that the reflection on that river was doing that? Yeah, and when I looked at that bit, that was incredible. Do you remember that sky that was going over the top of the mountain? We're all absolutely bubbling around over ourselves about the joy, and it's like a most marvelous boost to our sense of well-being.
Well, you mentioned the word honouring, and I wrote down a sentence that I heard you say, actually. I love this suggestion that landscape photography is about honouring the landscape. Let me unpick a little further, though, what you personally mean about honouring the landscape.
I think for a long time it's been, this is quite a big thing to say, because the people in this world would be much more articulate about it. But when you think of just, I don't know, let's take somebody like Attenborough and Chris Packham and various others who will speak, very, very passionately about it. I think the natural world and us, I don't mean just us landscape photographers, but human beings have been traveling on different tracks. And I've got a feeling that the consequence of COVID is going to have a far greater, profound consequences than we can ever imagine. Yeah. I mean, we have never experienced anything like this. And I think we're rethinking. I was rethinking our situation and our position on this earth. Yeah. But I really do believe that our relationship with the natural world, be it through our cameras and landscape photography or naturalists or biologists, is going to benefit hugely. Yeah. It's not them and us. I go and feed crows every day, and they're waiting for me. And it just gives me the greatest pleasure. Other people think crows, but hold on a minute. I think that closeness is really just completely wonderful, that relationship. And we're prepared to devote ourselves to that whole business of producing the photograph. What really is fascinating is when we see the finished result, when you think Ansel Adams said 12 a year and you're doing well, when you see the finished result that could be a bit sterile and soulless, we know well enough, and you will know this, but we thought it was there. And you look at the finished result and you say, no, it doesn't awaken in me what it did at the time.
Are you hard on yourself then? It sounds like you probably are.
I think we all are. I mean, I use Ansel Adams as a measurement. A lot of people think, is passé, but actually, if you reread his books, and remember, he was a massive intellect, and he was incredibly articulate when he came to talk about what photography actually does mean. And his standards were stratospherically high.
Oh God, yeah.
And you know that phrase. We don't photograph what it looks like, what it feels like. Instead, what it feels like. We know that phrase. But and that's, I think, when you hear that he was able to transform geographic reality to transcendent emotional experience. That's what he did. And when you look at some of my very distinguished colleagues, and I look at Landscape Photographer of the Year images, and I think, wow, that does absolutely transport me to a place of transcendent experience. And I think photography for a long time has been misunderstood. The worst phrase to confirm that is, you got 36 goes, you're bound to get something. I just thought, don't say that. It's not what it's about. It's not a trial and error. You never know. It might come out. Even we used to say that. You remember? Hope it comes out.
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah. We talk a lot on this show, and you mentioned meditation a moment ago, actually, then. But we talk about the solace. We talk about the meditative process of photography. I'm glad I got it right.
Yes.
Is that what drew you to it? Is that something that you found with your experience and years behind a lens?
Well put. Thank you. Monumentally so. Absolutely monumentally so. And I know many of my distinguished chums will find themselves thinking, I just need to commune.
Yeah.
I need to go out and commune. And my camera's the supportive, I keep using the word conduit, to assist me to do that. And I just think it's just, I think many people haven't fully grasped it. I really do. And so I think in the US, there is much more credit given to photography and what it's about. It's pretty shameful. You add up the number of photographic galleries who will show landscape photographs in the UK. It's shameful. They're not enough. I think there's probably, forgive me if I haven't got this quite right, but I think there's probably not more than maybe a dozen, if that, in London. And some cities don't have any at all, and yet most US cities will have a dedicated gallery to photography.
Although there is a really interesting story about when you went across to America. This might be 10 or 15 years ago, where initially you came across a bit of a brick wall, though, talking to gallerists, didn't you?
I did. You've raised a very good point. I remember I went to look for a gallery, and I wrote to them a bit longer than that. I think it might be 20 years ago. And I went with my daughter, who was pretending to be my PA. And I had appointments with 18 different galleries in Soho and right in the heart of New York. And it was fairly daunting. I remember somebody said, you look, I bought a suit I had a suit made, and somebody said, you look like a bookie, not like a landscape photographer. Anyway, I went, and we went to most of them, and their response by the way, they had huge images in their galleries, and many of them were inaccessible. Many of them were images that were very challenging, and they looked at my portfolio of landscapes, and I remember one who epitomized the general reaction, and it went like this: these are amazing. These are absolutely beautiful. They're just wonderful. I've never seen anything like this. It's just incredible. Paused. But we can't show you. Oh, why? Well, it's not what we show, and that was pretty much the reaction until finally I did find a gallery just at the end, and she was very complimentary. She said, "Yeah, I'd love to show you." Yeah. So she was less restrictive on the style. So it was fascinating, and beauty finds it's hard to get a look in. Landscape photography of images of beauty. we all know, when you look at landscape photography, and you look at lots of landscape photographs produced by, some wonderfully talented people in the UK, the fact that there are 1,200 photographic clubs who keep photography alive and well in our country, well done them, all mostly voluntary. Fantastic what they do, but for some reason the big galleries won't have anything to do with beauty. I think if we had a lovely gallery in the middle of Oxford Street, it would do really well.
Absolutely.
Offering beauty.
Let's start with Mark Neal. My question for Charlie will be about people in images. Some of your pictures feature people, some don't. How important, though, are people in your images? Do you wait for them to enter, or is it a chance if they do feature?
I think that's a jolly good question, Mark. I did a book on Venice many years ago,
yes.
And I found it, everybody said, oh, absolute dream job. Most incredibly photogenic country, whatever that word means. I will just leave a question mark hanging there with the word photogenic, but just extraordinarily beautiful. It was the hardest job I'd ever done in my life. The people were wrong. They were not Venetians.
Oh.
They were just tourists. I found it incredibly difficult. The reason I didn't really want people in the landscape is one sentence. I felt that if the viewer of the landscape, of your photograph, were to go to that place, which essentially you have transported them to, it would be wonderful if they felt they could be the first person to go there. And it wouldn't have been pre-visited by someone else. And there is that someone else in the photograph. And I find it difficult to know what their relevance is. Photojournalism, Cartier-Bresson and many others, they have the right person. Absolutely the right person, in the right clothing, doing the right thing. And you just look at it and just think, oh my, your powers of observation, your sense of timing, your accuracy is just so commendable. So people, for me, I find really difficult. They're not obtrusive, they just don't fit.
Mally Davis, huge respect, he says, and love for Charlie's work. Mally is a fellow man of the landscape, Charlie. Do you, this could be a tricky question, do you have a favourite serendipitous moment?
Yes, I do. I've got two, actually. One are some cows in a place called Lochindale, which was just given to me either by a divine power or my mother. Who died a while back. Cows just decided to come and perform in front of me. They were paddling in a position that was completely right. And it was just completely wonderful. So they delivered to me a line of themselves, which was perfectly parallel with the foreshore, them, the water, the behind, and so there was a series of bands, and it was just too marvelous for words. The other one was an image of Cadiz, where a seagull flew at exactly the right height, and another one was in Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, where I desperately needed a little event to take place with a big panoramic, and in walked or arrived a boat with a blue sail, precisely the same blue as Lake Titicaca.
Lynn Fraser, you mentioned Scotland. Lynn lives in Scotland amongst the most beautiful landscape backdrops, and I know you like spending your time there. I'd like to know, says Lynn, what is the one element that consistently draws Charlie to make an image of a scene? If there is one, I suppose.
I think that's a super question. I think relationships probably, and elements within the landscape that will mitigate the two-dimensional nature of photography and try and introduce depth, and encourages the viewer to enter and to explore, and to be delivered a sort of sense of harmonious. It's a bit like interior design, Neil, really. I always think, you walk into a room and you don't necessarily look at the details, but you just say, oh my gosh, this is absolutely marvelous. What a lovely atmosphere. And actually, it's as a consequence of the married couple maybe having spent a lot of time and paid a lot of attention to where the sofa goes, where the photographs go, where the decorations, the mirrors, the lighting, which complements everything. And then the viewer walks in, doesn't, as I say, look at details, but just says how lovely it is. And so they receive a marvelous sense of well-being from their position in that room. And it's as a consequence, as I say, of the care, loving attention that has been spent, trying to encourage that. And it's a combination of perhaps visual appreciation. It's worth saying that I have got to know a friend, I must write to him actually, a neurosurgeon, as one does, very distinguished man, called Henry Marsh. And I asked him some time ago, how long do you think it takes to appreciate or to make a favourable or an unfavourable response to a photograph? He said, just about, I don't know, maybe about a second. Ooh. And I thought that was really revealing. And he said, the brain and the eye are an amazing double act. When somebody's looking at one of your photographs, to your listeners, it's a really interesting thing to do. When you're showing it to them, look at their face and look at their eyes, and also listen to their breathing. It's really fascinating. And if they come back and say, that's really interesting, they don't actually like it. That word interesting is always a killer phrase.
Well, it's a bit like the word nice, isn't it? That's nice.
That's like that, yeah. Awful. Yeah. I showed a photograph to my wife the other day, which I really like. And she can be very critical and constructively so sometimes. She looked at it, and I was looking at her, and her eyes got slightly bigger. Yeah. And she physically moved toward it, and then she said, "Oh, that's beautiful." And that was all within she embraced all the elements. She probably subconsciously looked at them, but came back having made an assessment of all the collective elements, making a sort of coherent whole, if you like. So to answer that question, I think that's it. There are a number of elements that you have your own personal criteria that you apply to any landscape photograph that you're going to make. I find that a very, very interesting process, and the great Adams spoke at length about that.
Well, across the pond, as they say, from Lynn, Dennis Lee in America, Charlie, absolutely gorgeous work across the board. The 6 new photography images in the gallery, stunning. So I'm a bit of a gearhead, he says, in the sense that I love to know what people use. And not only that, but the logistics of it, really. It's pretty obvious that you like to move a lot when you're working. And from your captions, I guess that you probably work both out of a vehicle and by wandering afoot. So here's the question. When wandering by foot, how much gear do you take with you, or can you take, I suppose?
I think that's a jolly good question. I mean, the equipment's very important. A lot of people on lighter land trips say, do I need a tripod? And I think I'm going to get a lot of stick from this. I think it's pretty mandatory if you're doing landscape. And it's not about long shutter speeds. No. It's about treating your photograph as a massive production, multi-dimensional production. And it's not about, I'm glad I got my tripod because I want to do a long shutter speed and I don't want to pump up my eyes. So, to compensate for the fact that I don't want to, or whatever it is. So a tripod, I think, is mandatory to make you take your photograph, your production seriously. Point 1. Point 2, take lenses that have parity with the way you see. Yeah. If you want wide angle, then bring wide angle. But you tend not to want to haul something way over in the distance back to you, then don't bring long lenses. No. I often think it's jolly good to have lenses that equate to your human vision, which is sort of oval, essentially, and the parameters of your human vision. So the standard lens, whatever it is, 35 to sort of 50, 28, 50 maybe, full frame, is pretty much suits me. It really, really does, yeah.
There's another equipment question here, but it's entirely different, Charlie. It's nothing to do with cameras. It's all to do with comfort, from Anna McCarthy, who says, a practical one for Charlie. What's your ultimate fitted, thin but insulating gloves for shooting in the cold British winter landscape?
I never photograph with gloves on.
Oh, you don't? Right.
No. I've lost multiple pairs of gloves, Neil. And I've probably lost 30 to 40 pairs of gloves over the years. Oh, no, it's awful. It's shameful. But I'm a bit neglectful, and I lose a lot of things and always have. I think gloves are important, but there's something, this seems really more an emotional thing. But when you depress the shutter, a monumental thing takes place. All your preparation, all your devotion, all your understanding and your love of what you're doing, and your need to own the landscape in this manner, it all comes rushing through in that moment. Yeah. That one rather simple little click. But actually, that simple little click is a massive thing, and it lands on the sensor or on the film or whatever it is. You need almost to do it with your finger. You need to sort of feel that shutter release.
So it's a physical and mental connection all at the same time.
Yeah, nicely put.
Yeah.
And on my very old and yet lovely Hasselblad with a nice digital back, I have to say, everybody knows the Hasselblad sound of that shutter.
Yeah.
We all do, even non-Hasselblad owners. There is just something marvelous about it. So yes, you're right. The physical connection, very important.
I've got two more, and then I'll save the others for when I come and meet your crows. Poor Timlet. What would you say your photographic style, or how would you say your photographic style has changed across the years? Was that a conscious change? Was it inspired by any specific events or any specific photographers?
I think a lot of whatever developments have taken place within me has almost been out of my control. I'm not sure it's been conscious. I really don't. I think one of the things that possibly I've got to admit to is in the early stages, and still now, multiple errors.
Yeah.
I really do think that whatever development I've experienced, be it hopefully better, are the images that I'm making now, do they convey what I feel in the great Cartier-Bresson, your head, your heart, and your eye on the same axis.
Yes.
That absolutely breathtakingly good line. And what was the other one that I liked? Recognition and pre-visualization blended together in a single moment of awareness. That Ansel Adams one. I think, although you may think I'm going off the point, when I look at the results from those early days when I was working, probably the first 10 or 15 years, I found I was making mistakes, tiny ones, where there were little conflicts within the landscape that I didn't notice. And it's shameful. I just didn't notice. And we all know that landscape photography is about seeing and noticing and being super alert. And I think my eyes, my seeing process wasn't embracing all the bits of the landscape that should have been. So tighter. And I found myself responding to more architecture than I used to. I mean, that photograph of Cadiz, the serendipitous moment, it's a lovely word, isn't it? I found that gave me immense joy. It really did. Yeah. And we all know, we could be photographing a river and there'd be a little breeze, and suddenly it disrupts our seeing process and our requirement and our need. So the pre-visualization, I think that's where Ansel Adams was so fascinating, was that he needed having recognition and the pre-visualization blended together in one single moment of awareness. If he pre-made the image, you and I know this, it was all done. He'd actually done the photograph, yet physically hadn't. So it resided in his mind and his heart. And then he had this phenomenal process that he was so good at to produce a photograph that had parity, total 100% parity with his pre-visualization. And if it was 5% off, it went into the B category. We're talking about a highlight on a leaf, or whatever it was. So, I think that's just such a marvelous thing. So that it's rather like a cook. I was thinking about this the other day, that I don't cook at all, but you could easily say to a cook who's done a marvelous meal, which is a huge creative production, that's absolutely delicious. Oh, I'm so glad you liked it. Sorry, the beans weren't quite al dente. And what do you mean? It was fine. The beans were lovely. No, they didn't meet my high standards of cooking. I still make mistakes. I think probably I gave them maybe 1 to 1.5 minutes too long in the water, in the boiling water. So they're a bit soft. I wanted them to have a little bit of crispness. So I think that, and you'll know that being a broadcaster and a presenter, you'll know so well that your standards become almost so stratospherically high that you spend the rest of your life trying to reach them. And you don't always get there. So hence, going all the way back to Ansel Adams, 12 a year and you're doing well, you want to say, well, hold on a minute. You lived and breathed Yosemite and all the big national parks. What do you mean only 12? Yeah, but the others were okay, but they didn't quite cut it. No.
They weren't the beans that I wanted.
They weren't the beans. They weren't the beans. So I think maintain your high standards. Yeah. And so I'm to answer her question a bit better. I think I am seeing more, and I'm getting more aesthetic pleasure from things that perhaps 20 years ago I may have not even noticed.
Well, I'm going to close. I do have a short question on my own, but I'm going to close with Simon Isherwood, who appears to be a bit of a fan of yours, Charlie, I would say. He says, I've watched talks given by Charlie. I have his books. I've bought prints. I think I know every interview that he's ever given on YouTube. So I feel I know everything I can about someone so important to me and my interest in landscape photography. So what to ask Charlie? I want to ask him the impossible question as it was once referred to by the great Michael Parkinson. So stand by, Charlie.
Okay, I'm holding on to the chair.
What is the one question, this is the question, what is the one question you have never been asked that you either wish you had or wonder why it's not been asked?
Gosh, I think it gives rise to other questions. So it's really the worst one is which has been your favorite photograph?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And I can't deal with that at all, for obvious reasons. Although I did participate in a program the other day, which I really enjoyed doing, and it had a title that did have that question. I think I've got an answer.
Okay.
Yeah, I have. I think the question I would not be able to answer is simply this: what words can you find to express your sense of wonder and amazement at this world that you are part of? And how can you find words in the language to express that? And I can't find the words. So all I can do is stand there and gasp, because I think when we do suddenly pause for a moment, and what do we mean by contemplative and meditative? When we actually pause and think, we are part of this absolutely extraordinary thing called human existence. And I looked at the moon yesterday and I thought, it's not just the moon. It's at precisely the right position to give us our title, our tides. The sun could be, I don't know, I'm not nearly good enough to be able to express it, but supposing it's 100,000 miles nearer or further away. So I know there's all sorts of difficulties in living in this world, and it's pretty bumpy ride. Yeah. But nevertheless, it is completely extraordinary. And when we stand there with our cameras, in whatever setting, Glencoe, doesn't matter where it is, the desert, I think we are, as photographers, we are going through a process of awe, and we need to own this extraordinary experience. And we don't know how else to do it. We could write, we're not very maybe good at that. We could poetry, yes, music, but these creative processes that occupy us so profoundly are absolutely immense, and we have to photograph. We have to photograph. And so that's the question I would not be able to answer, because I can't express it. I can only express it. I can't find language. I can only express it through my photography.
Well, I think you've kind of answered the last question then that I was about to ask you within that answer. And you mentioned the word wonder, because I'd written down here, does what you see still fill you with wonder? And I think the answer is clearly a resounding yes. Yes,
it really does. And how wonderful that we have it. Thank you to Nearfor, I'll never pronounce his name, Nieps, and Foxtel, but thank you to them for producing something that we now, somebody told me that it's every 24 hours, I don't know, you'll probably be able to confirm, 350 million photographs every 24 hours uploaded to Facebook and 85 million to Instagram. Wow. I call it the people's new common language. We're all photographing absolutely everything. And yet, what the finished results may be, that's another story, but and very pleasing in many cases. It's a wonderful thing to be engaged in, and it is the people's new common language, don't you think? I mean, we love our photography. We do.
My thanks to both my guests in this holiday special today, the late Steve Shipman and the inimitable Charlie Waite. It was a real pleasure to have conversations with both. Come on, pups, this way. Just in time for an aeroplane. There's never one far away from our recordings. Where's that one? It's a bit cloudy up there today. It's got a lot of low cloud. I can't see you. Where are you? Next week we take a break across the week, but for patrons, you have a month and a half of reflections plus a good 200 other shows, including more and the extra mile editions. So there's much to catch up on, I hope. Talking of which, today's Extra Mile and Reflections edition is available. And my guest is an extra miler with a passion, absolute passion, for France, a photographer called Bob Soltis. So I'll be back in a couple of Fridays, though Reflections starts up again a week Monday on the 25th. We're doing some R&R, just to regather our creative thoughts. A few closing thoughts too before the PS. My sincere thanks to you, if you are or you're about to become an extra miler. We'll keep building this wonderful community of kindness in the photographic world. And a few mentions for those who smooth the voyage for us. My thanks to Neil Ford, who is in charge of IT, and seemingly me, and it rhymes. My thanks also to Andrea Gilpin, who keeps a watchful eye over Instagram, as does Kelly Mitchell for Facebook, and to Michael Mixon, who helps with show research. Write a postscript for the show. Today it's from Saul Leiter, a photographer and an artist, it seems. I know I should have known that, but what he said about the gentle nature of photography, I think, fits very well with today's theme. From Saul Leiter: you don't need to shout with a photograph. Sometimes the whisper is what people remember. I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
What's there to hold in the light of this moon? My mind keeps searching, but my heart decides. Thoughts can be cruel, they're not mine to hold. The space unravels when you let go.
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.